Imagine a convicted criminal sitting in a Manhattan jail cell, somehow providing $170 million worth of quote-unquote tax advice to one of the most powerful billionaires on Wall Street.
Right, and it sounds completely impossible.
Yeah, exactly. Like the plot of some bad financial thriller. You would think the IRS or the SEC or just, basic corporate compliance would flag a 9-figure payout to a guy who doesn't even have a law degree or a CPA license.
You definitely think so.
But that is exactly what the paper trail shows.
It really shatters the whole conventional understanding of how elite wealth operates.
Mm.
We're all conditioned to believe that the system has, guardrails.
Right, like standard oversight.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We assume that if a transaction is large enough or if a person is prominent enough, the standard machinery of oversight just automatically kicks in.
But it doesn't.
No, it doesn't. When you start pulling at the threads of these transnational, ultra-wealthy enterprises, you realize those guardrails are essentially decorative.
Wow.
Nothing.
Decorative. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, elite wealth doesn't just hire better lawyers. It effectively creates its own legal jurisdiction.
Which brings us to the monumental task sitting on the desk between us today. We are looking at just a sheer mountain of raw data.
And we really don't use the word mountain lightly here.
No, not at all. We are talking about the forced public release of over 3.5 million pages of documents, 180,000 images, and 2,000 videos.
All released by the Department of Justice in late 2025 and early 2026.
Right. As a direct result of the Epstein Files Transparency Act, it is an archive so massive that it threatens to completely rewrite our understanding of global power dynamics over the last, 3 decades?
Easily 3 decades. Just to give you a sense of the physical scale, if you printed out 3.5 million pages and stack them, you're looking at a paper tower reaching hundreds of feet into the air.
That is just incomprehensible.
It is. It's an overwhelming volume of human correspondence, legal maneuvering, banking wire transfers, and localized police reports.
It encompasses the original Florida and New York cases, right?
Yeah, those, plus the prosecution of Ghislaine Maxwell, the internal FBI and Office of Inspector General, reviews the ones detailing the catastrophic mishandling of those early investigations.
And of course, the highly scrutinized inquiries into his death.
Exactly. All of it.
And we are going to approach this archive differently than anyone else. You and I are acting as senior investigative analysts for this deep dive.
For putting on the forensic gloves.
Yes, exactly. No media sensationalism, no internet conspiracy theories, no late-night Reddit rabbit holes. We are going to examine the fundamental architecture of information found within this DOJ release.
We're looking for the structural beams of the enterprise.
Right. But before we go a single step further into this labyrinth, I need to look you, the listener, right in the eye.
This is crucial.
It really is. The sources we are analyzing today contain highly politically charged material. This archive implicates, mentions, and documents individuals from the absolute highest echelons of both left-wing and right-wing politics.
Both sides.
Yes, both sides. So I need to state clearly, verbatim, and for the record, this deep dive takes absolutely no sides.
None.
We do not endorse the viewpoints of the original sources. We are not validating the claims of the politicians, nor are we endorsing the narratives of the media entities that covered this.
Right.
We are strictly operating to impartially report the factual contents of the paper trail as it exists in the government archives. Nothing more, nothing less.
That boundary is just essential. The moment you introduce political tribalism into an investigation of this magnitude, you lose the thread.
Yeah, completely.
Tribalism is the enemy of forensic truth. Our mandate is to apply a clinical comparative matrix to separate circumstantial rumors from hard, undeniable documentary evidence.
And, as I was reading through these millions of pages over the last few weeks, trying to make sense of the sheer gravity of it all, I kept coming back to a specific analogy.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
Investigating a network like this, a syndicate shielded by billions of dollars, ironclad NDAs, and elite social protection, it's exactly like mapping a black hole in deep space.
Okay, I like that. Because you can't actually see the singularity.
Exactly. You cannot see it. The core event, the crimes themselves, the physical acts of abuse, they are rarely, if ever, recorded on a ledger.
Right. They aren't captured on a security camera that the local police managed to subpoena.
No. The singularity is invisible to the standard observer.
But you can measure the exact mass of that black hole by observing its gravitational pull on everything caught in its orbit.
You
map the accretion disk.
Yes, you map the disk. You watch the stars and the gas getting warped, stretched, and violently pulled into the center.
And in our case, the gravitational pull is the paper trail.
Exactly. It's the panicked, encrypted email sent at 2 in the morning between hedge fund managers. It's the meticulously kept, handwritten flight logs of private Boeing jets.
And those massive, structurally unexplainable financial wires moving through correspondent banks in Russia.
Right. You might never have a video of the crime occurring in the room, but the gravitational distortion of reality around these actors proves the massive, undeniable weight of the criminal enterprise.
That framework dictates exactly how we're going to dissect this archive. We are going to highlight exactly where the standard investigative machinery, things like local police interviews, civil depositions, and standard plea deals, completely stalled out.
Where the human element failed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But we're also going to show where the immutable paper trail provides definitive clarity.
Because where human memory and strategic honesty falter, the metadata survives.
It always survives.
So let's start right there, at the failure of human memory. Let's look at the court deposition.
Okay.
This is where we analyze the human element of the investigation and demonstrate the mechanics of how witness testimony is deliberately, strategically weaponized to obfuscate the truth.
The 2015 defamation lawsuit. Right?
Yes, I want to center on Virginia Giuff v. Ghislaine Maxwell.
That civil litigation is effectively the Rosetta Stone for the entire 2026 document release.
It really is.
The discovery process in that specific lawsuit is what generated the thousands of pages of internal communications that Congress eventually fought to unseal.
Right, because Virginia Giuff sued Maxwell for defamation after Maxwell publicly called Giuffre's claims of abuse obvious lies.
And because it's a civil suit, Giuffre's legal team gains the power of subpoena. They get to compel Maxwell to sit in a conference room under oath in April 2016 and answer questions on the record.
I read the transcripts of that deposition, and it is a masterclass in what I can only describe as strategic amnesia.
Oh, absolutely.
The standard investigative machinery relies on a very simple premise. You ask a suspect a question, and you either get an answer, you catch them in a verifiable lie, or they confess.
Right. That's how it's supposed to work.
But Maxwell completely breaks that machinery. She utilizes the "I don't recall" defense to a degree that feels almost mathematically calculated.
Or she simply invokes her Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination over and over again.
It is maddening for an investigator.
It is, but you have to understand the legal mechanics behind why she's doing it. She is weaponizing the burden of proof.
How?
Well, in a deposition, every time a defendant says, "I don't recall," they're forcing the plaintiff to spend time, money, and judicial capital to prove something that should be self-evident.
Wow. And the examples are just staggering. The lawyers ask her, "Did you ever fly on one of Epstein's planes with a 17-year-old?"
And she doesn't recall.
Right. They ask if she remembers introducing Giuffre to prominent political figures in London. She doesn't recall.
It's a wall.
It is. They show her a flight log with the initials GM written by the pilot. They ask her if GM stands for Ghislaine Maxwell.
And what does she say?
She looks at the paper and responds, "How do you know GM is me? GM can stand for any level. It could be Georgina, George."
George. Unbelievable.
But wait, I have to jump in here. Isn't, I don't recall, just like defense attorney 101?
Yeah, pretty much.
Any high-priced lawyer is going to tell their client not to admit to anything, not to offer any unprompted memories. So how do investigators actually corner someone who just decides to play dumb?
You hit the nail on the head regarding the financial war of attrition. Memory isn't just fragile in the context of elite criminal defense. Memory is a liability that the ultra-wealthy can afford to erase.
Right.
When a suspect with unlimited legal funding develops profound amnesia about the last 15 years of their life, you cannot cross-examine a void.
You can't interrogate, "I don't remember."
Exactly. So to break through that wall, you have to find human testimony that contrasts so vividly with the amnesia that the silence begins to look like perjury.
And the files give us incredible contrasting examples from the staff. Let's talk about the deposition of one of the private jet pilots, David Rogers.
Ah, yes.
This is what I call the Schrodinger's passenger defense.
That is a perfect name for it.
Yeah.
Rogers' testimony is fascinating because it represents the perfect, plausible shield.
Right. He testifies under oath that his job was strictly aviation.
He claims that once he's in the cockpit and that heavy, reinforced cockpit door clicks shut, he ceases to know who is in the back of the plane.
It's so convenient.
It is. He prepares the required passenger manifests based on who he sees boarding Epstein and his main assistants. But beyond that, he pleads complete professional ignorance.
It's brilliant in its simplicity, really. He's not necessarily lying about his job description, but he is defining his field of vision so incredibly narrowly that he renders himself utterly useless to any prosecutor.
Right. Any prosecutor asking what happened in the cabin during a transatlantic flight gets nothing.
The passengers both exist and don't exist until the door opens again.
Exactly. He provides the sanitized narrow view, but then you overlay that with the deposition of the escape manager, Ronaldo Rizzo.
And Rizzo shatters the sanitized illusion completely.
He really does.
Rizzo's testimony is haunting. He was managing an estate for a friend of Epstein and Maxwell's, and he provides this incredibly visceral, sensory memory of an event inside the house.
Yeah, he describes a scene where Ghislaine Maxwell is directly, verbally instructing a group of 11 to 12 young girls.
And under oath, he estimates their ages. He says they could have been from as young as 14, 15 to 18, maybe. He specifically describes them as very girlish.
He doesn't just describe their presence, though. He describes the mechanics of the operation.
He does. He details Maxwell instructing these young girls to go into the living room where they engage in what Rizzo's wife was told is called the kissing game for Jeffrey Epstein.
Just horrifying.
He describes it as highly inappropriate girls grinding on each other, lifting their tops, while Maxwell sat right next to Epstein, casually watching the entire thing unfold.
What makes Rizzo's testimony so devastating to the I don't recall defense is the atmospheric reality of it.
Right. He's not a lawyer offering a legal conclusion.
Exactly. He's a bystander offering a sensory memory that is too specific, too bizarre, and frankly too disturbing to have been fabricated out of thin air.
It completely cuts through the sterile, calculated amnesia of the primary defendants.
But here's the ultimate problem with the human element. Even with Rizzo's powerful, vivid testimony, it's still he said, she said in the eyes of a defense attorney.
Yeah, that's true.
It's one former employee's memory against a billionaire's ironclad denial. If human testimony is this fragile, this easily contested, where does the standard investigative machinery go next?
It pivots entirely. When human memory fails, forensic analysts turn to the metadata.
You stop asking people what they remember and you start asking the documents what they recorded.
Yes. And in this specific investigation, that pivot leads us directly to the flight logs.
The flight logs of the private Boeing 727.
The media infamously dubbed it the Lolita Express, but let's look at it clinically. This is where the documentary evidence pierces right through the strategic amnesia we just talked about.
It is the ultimate forensic counterpunch. Think back to Ghislaine Maxwell, sitting in that deposition room, looking at her own initials, GM, and claiming it could be George.
George! Still can't get over that.
Well, the paper trail does not suffer from memory loss. The lawyers subpoenaed the actual handwritten pilot logs from David Rogers.
Wait, the very same pilot who claimed he didn't know what was happening behind his closed cockpit door.
The very same.
And the mechanics of these logs are crucial. A pilot can't just casually forget to write down who is on a plane.
No, the Federal Aviation Administration requires precise tracking of weight, balance, and passenger manifests for international flights. It's a federal requirement.
So these logs serve as an immutable structural spine for the entire timeline.
Exactly. When you analyze the unsealed logs, the initials GM appear over 300 times.
Over 300 times.
And more devastatingly, the logs definitively place GM on the exact same flights as Virginia Joof, who was a minor at the time, on 23 separate occasions.
23 times. We aren't talking about bumping into someone at a crowded airport lounge. We are talking about a highly documented, repeated logistical pattern.
Right.
The logs meticulously track the movement of this aircraft across a global transit map,
Right.
Palm Beach, Florida, Teterboro in New York, Le Bourget in Paris, and the U.S. Virgin Islands.
This is why flight manifests are the holy grail for tracking transnational networks. They do not prove what happened on the island. They don't prove what occurred in the bedroom. But what they definitively prove is access, timeline, and geographic reality.
They prove that specific individuals possess the ability to be in a highly restricted geographic location at a specific moment in time.
It completely annihilates the "I was never there" defense.
Yeah.
You cannot legally claim you don't know a teenager when you've shared a pressurized metal tube with her crossing the Atlantic Ocean 24 times.
No, you really can't. And it isn't just the inner circle. The files released in 2026 contain thousands of pages of these manifests.
Yeah, and they tie incredibly powerful global figures to specific dates and locations that directly contradict their public attempts to distance themselves from Epstein.
Especially after his initial 2008 conviction.
Exactly.
We see names like Jean-Luc Brunel, the French model scout, logged on the plane 25 times between 1998 and 2005.
Yep.
You see the former U.S. Secretary of the Navy, John Phelan, flying from New York to London and back with Epstein in 2006.
It is a textbook forensic overlay. You take the pilot's statement, I don't know who is in the back, and you superimpose his own handwritten manifests detailing the exact names of the people in the back.
Right.
You take the defendant's statement, I don't recall flying with this girl, and you present a federal document showing they crossed international borders together 23 times.
The metadata provides the undeniable clarity that the human witnesses refuse to give.
It's the gravitational pull.
We can't see the singularity, but we can see the jet fuel receipts. We can see the passport stamps. We can measure the exact physical movement of the actors.
And once you map the physical movement, the next logical step is to map the energy that powers the entire system.
And in a transnational enterprise, that energy is capital.
Which brings us to the most complex and frankly terrifying part of this archive financial forensics.
Following the money.
Following the money. To truly understand the scale of the Epstein network, you have to stop looking at him merely as a wealthy, localized sex offender in Palm Beach.
Okay, how should we look at him?
You have to start viewing him as a highly active node in a global shadow economy. The 2026 document release completely blew the lid off the financial mechanisms he utilized.
The Senate investigators, specifically the team led by Senator Ron Wyden of the Finance Committee, spent years digging into the banking architecture.
And what they found fundamentally rewrites the narrative.
Wyden's team uncovered evidence of over $1.5 billion, that's billion with a B, in suspicious transactions flagged by the Treasury Department.
It's staggering.
Let's break down the mechanics of that. A number like $1.5 billion is almost abstract. These aren't just large checks written to friends. These are suspicious activity reports, or SARs.
We need to explain what a SAR actually is, because it's not just a bank hitting a weird transaction button.
Right, it's more serious than that.
Much more. Under the Bank Secrecy Act and the Patriot Act, financial institutions are legally required to file a SAR with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, or FinCEN.
That's when they detect transactions that bear the specific hallmarks of money laundering, terrorism financing, or human trafficking, right?
Exactly. It is a legal flare gun fired directly at the federal government.
And the DOJ files detail 4,725 specific wire transfers, adding up to over $1 billion, moving in and out of his accounts at J.P. Morgan in just the decade after 2003.
Let that sink in.
Hitting the SAR button 4,725 times means the bank's internal alarms were essentially ringing nonstop for 10 years.
Nonstop. And he was also moving hundreds of millions more through the Bank of New York Mellon and Deutsche Bank.
But the most alarming detail uncovered in these financial forensic files is his extensive use of Russian correspondent bank accounts.
This is where the paper trail reveals sophisticated cartel-level money laundering techniques.
Okay, let's unpack correspondent banking. Explain this to me like I'm an adult, but I don't have a degree in international finance. How does moving money through Russia actually hide it from U.S. regulators?
Okay, let's trace the journey of a wire transfer. Imagine a bank in the U.S. Virgin Islands, where Epstein had his primary operations, needs to send $10 million to an account in Eastern Europe. The Virgin Islands Bank doesn't have a physical branch or a direct relationship with a bank in Moscow. So they use an intermediary. They use a correspondent bank, usually a massive institution in New York, to route the funds.
They use the New York bank as a bridge.
Precisely. But here is the loophole. If you route the money through a correspondent bank located in a jurisdiction with intentionally weak oversight, like certain Russian or Eastern European institutions, you effectively sever the U.S. regulatory line of sight.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the money enters the Russian correspondent bank, gets mixed with thousands of other transactions, and then is forwarded to its final destination.
So it's untraceable.
It is a classic laundering technique called layering. It obscures the origin, the destination, and the true ownership of the funds.
This completely reframes the investigation, which explains the most shocking revelation in the 2026 documents.
The secret investigation?
Yes, the files revealed the existence of a secret, highly classified investigation that ran from 2010 to 2015. But it wasn't run by the FBI Sex Crimes Unit, it was run by the DEA.
The Drug Enforcement Administration.
Why in the world is the DEA investigating a convicted sex offender?
The involvement of the DEA is the smoking gun, proving that the standard investigative machinery of the early 2000s, the local Palm Beach police, the Florida state prosecutors, were completely out of their depth.
They were looking at a local prostitution ring.
And the DEA was looking at a transnational syndicate.
The unredacted DEA memo reveals that federal agents were tracking Epstein and 14 other unnamed targets because their financial footprint perfectly mirrored cartel behavior.
The memo explicitly states that these individuals were involved in illegitimate wire transfers, which are tied to illicit drug and/or prostitution activities occurring in the U.S. Virgin Islands and New York City.
That's huge.
Furthermore, the DEA brought in their Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force's Fusion Center.
The OCDETF?
Yes, the OCDETF Fusion Center is the apex of federal intelligence sharing. You do not bring in the Fusion Center unless you are tracking massive, cross-border, highly sophisticated syndicate activity.
He was operating like a cartel boss, financially speaking.
That really was.
And the files give us granular, undeniable examples of these financial flows that just bypass all standard corporate logic. We have to dive into the consulting payments. This brings us back to our opening hook.
The consulting payments represent the exact intersection where the legitimate corporate world bleeds into Epstein's shadow economy.
Let's look at the mechanics of the Leon Black payment. Leon Black is a billionaire titan of Wall Street, the founder of Apollo Global Management.
Right.
The Senate investigation documents show that over the course of several years, Leon Black paid Jeffrey Epstein $170 million for what he claimed was tax and estate planning advice.
Any forensic accountant looks at that and sees a blinding red flag. Jeffrey Epstein was not a licensed tax attorney.
Not at all.
Leon Black employs armies of the greatest tax lawyers on the planet. Why pay an unlicensed convicted sex offender $170 million?
Let's break down how a sham contract works. To move $170 million cleanly, you need invoices and deliverables to show the IRS.
Right.
If your deliverable is physical, like real estate or artwork, it can be appraised and audited. But if the deliverable is advice or consulting, it is completely intangible.
It's the perfect vehicle for laundering capital.
The Senate investigators literally labeled the story a sham. They found that the actual tax advice Epstein provided was incredibly shoddy, to the point where Black's legitimate lawyers had to constantly monitor and fix the work Epstein was supposedly doing.
$170 million is the GDP of a small island nation, paid as a consulting fee for bad advice.
And it wasn't an isolated incident. The files show extensive email contact between Epstein and Ariane de Rothschild, the head of the Edmond de Rothschild Group.
Another major player.
The archive includes a draft agreement from October 2015 showing the banking group agreeing to pay $25 million to Epstein's U.S. Virgin Islands registered company for strategic and tax risk advice related to U.S. investigations into Swiss banking practices.
Once again, $25 million for intangible strategic advice. If you view this through the lens of the DEA Fusion Center investigation, these astronomical fees start to look less like corporate consulting and much more like institutional extortion, high-level bribery, or the laundering of massive capital for undeclared illicit services.
The paper trail proves the money moved. It's the justification for the money that completely collapses under forensic scrutiny.
Exactly.
And we cannot discuss his financial architecture without examining his final act. The files reveal the intricate details of the secret trust Epstein signed on August 8, 2019.
The timing here is chilling.
This is literally 2 days before he is found dead in his Manhattan jail cell.
The mechanics of estate law are crucial here. By moving hundreds of millions in assets, including his private islands and liquid capital, into an irrevocable trust right before his death, he was attempting to shield that wealth from civil liability and victims' restitution claims.
He allocated $50 million to his longtime lawyer, Darren Induk, and $25 million to his accountant, Richard Kahn.
Two men who Senate investigators suggest may have continued managing the financial remnants of his enterprise.
The timing, the sheer volume of capital, and the choice of beneficiaries paint a stark picture. He was ensuring that the financial architecture of his black hole survived his own physical demise.
The paper trail never sleeps. It just changes jurisdictions.
So, if the money and the flight logs are the undeniable mathematical truth of this network, what happens when we apply that exact same standard of proof to the most polarizing figures in this archive?
We need to apply our comparative forensic matrix to the politicians.
This is where our clinical rigor is tested the most.
It is, because the public discourse surrounding these specific names is almost entirely driven by partisan mythology and election cycle weaponization.
Right.
Our job is to use the matrix to filter out the noise and leave only the metadata.
Let's start by applying the matrix to former President Donald Trump. What does the archive actually contain, and what is just noise?
We begin with the circumstantial evidence and the unverified rumors. The 2026 files included a massive spreadsheet summarizing calls made to FBI tip lines over the years.
Okay.
One prominent entry was an unverified tip from an unnamed woman in New Mexico, submitted in August 2020, notably right before a major election.
And what did she claim?
She claimed she was trafficked by her uncle and Epstein in 1984 and alleged Trump was present for the disposal of an infant's body in Lake Michigan.
When you apply basic forensic timeline analysis to that tip, it falls apart.
Completely.
The FBI noted internally, and independent researchers confirmed, that the timeline defies reality. Epstein and Trump did not even meet until the late 1980s.
Right.
The claim was entirely unsubstantiated, but because it was in an FBI file, it had to be released under the Transparency Act.
Then there is the infamous Epstein-Nassar letter, which generated endless internet conspiracies.
Let's break down the mechanics of that document. The DOJ released a purported postcard from Epstein to Larry Nassar, the convicted USA gymnastics doctor. The letter claims Trump loved young nubile girls and liked to grope them.
But when you apply forensic document analysis, the mythology evaporates. The DOJ explicitly stated this letter was a fake.
How do they know for sure?
The postmark. The letter was postmarked from a processing center in Northern Virginia on August 13, 2019.
Wait, August 13th.
Jeffrey Epstein died in a locked cell in Manhattan on August 10, 2019.
Wow. Okay, so impossible.
Furthermore, the FBI handwriting analysis conducted in 2020 cast massive doubt on the penmanship matching Epstein's known samples. It was a manufactured document submitted to the FBI likely as a sick joke or a political smear, which the DOJ was legally obligated to release.
So that is the noise. What is the actual hard documentary evidence regarding Trump in the files?
The hard evidence grounds the relationship in geographic and historical reality. The flight logs, which we know are the structural spine, show that Donald Trump flew on Epstein's private jet 8 times between 1993 and 1996. Interestingly, there are no records, flight, financial, or photographic of him ever visiting the private island in the Virgin Islands or the Zorro Ranch in New Mexico.
We also have the verified 2002 magazine interview where Trump is quoted describing Epstein as a terrific guy who likes women on the younger side.
Yes, that's verified.
And while there are hundreds of mentions of Trump's name in the raw files, context is everything. The vast majority of these mentions are simply news clippings and magazine articles about Trump that Epstein hoarded, scanned, and emailed to his associates to gossip about New York real estate and politics.
The Matrix shows a documented social and geographical proximity in the mid-1990s, verified by flight logs, but a stark lack of forensic or financial evidence connecting Trump to the criminal enterprise itself.
Let's turn the Matrix toward the other major political figure dominating the archive, former President Bill Clinton. What is the noise and what is the metadata?
The most prominent piece of circumstantial testimony comes from the unsealed deposition of Johanna Streiberg.
Okay, what does she say?
During her sworn testimony, she was asked about Clinton, and she stated that Epstein told her one time that Clinton likes them young, referring to girls.
Legally speaking, that is textbook hearsay.
It is.
Streiberg immediately clarified that she never personally saw Clinton engage in any illegal acts, and she wasn't accusing him of anything directly. She was merely recounting a statement Epstein made to her.
It's secondhand.
Similar to the Trump files, there were also bizarre, unverified tips to the FBI, including a 2019 claim from a male victim alleging abuse by both Bush and Clinton on a yacht in 2000.
And the FBI noted at the time that there was absolutely zero corroborating evidence for the claim.
So we filter out the hearsay and the uncorroborated tips. What does the hard documentary evidence reveal about Bill Clinton?
The hard evidence is extensive and heavily documented. First, the flight logs.
The logs again.
The manifest definitively confirmed that Bill Clinton and his Secret Service detail traveled on the Boeing 727 at least 16 times. He utilized the jet extensively for international travel, particularly to Africa.
We also have the photographic evidence seized during the FBI raids. The document release included verified photos of Clinton sitting in a room with Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, and other figures.
And more notably, there is a photograph showing Clinton in what appears to be a hot tub or a spa setting with Maxwell and another individual whose face was heavily redacted by the DOJ prior to release.
And then there is the digital correspondence. The files released in January 2026 include an email from October 2009 sent by publicist Peggy Siegel.
This is a crucial piece of evidence.
The email explicitly states that Clinton and Jeff Bezos visited Epstein's house in 2009. The timeline here is critical.
Very critical.
Visiting Epstein in 2009 means maintaining a social relationship after Epstein's 2008 criminal conviction as a sex offender in Florida. I should note, Clinton's spokespeople have vehemently and repeatedly denied he had any contact whatsoever with Epstein after 2006.
But the paper trail contradicts the public denial, and that contradiction resulted in real-world political fallout.
It really did.
Following the release of these files, the Republican-led House Oversight Committee subpoenaed Bill and Hillary Clinton in early 2026.
The mechanics of that subpoena battle were historic. When the Clintons initially refused to comply, calling the probe legally invalid and politically motivated, the committee advanced a motion to hold them in contempt of Congress.
Which is a massive escalation.
And the evidence was so compelling that several Democrats actually crossed the aisle to vote alongside Republicans in the committee. To avoid the spectacle of a full House floor vote on contempt, the Clintons eventually agreed to a closed-door testimony in late February 2026.
When you apply the matrix to both Trump and Clinton, you see how the noise, the fake Nassar letters, the unverified election eve tips clouds public perception.
But the clinical paper trail grounds the reality.
The flight logs, the verified photographs, the server emails, they prove that both men had historical, undeniable, social and logistical associations with Epstein's network.
The metadata doesn't convict them of crimes, but it completely obliterates the sanitized, heavily curated public narratives they both tried to present to the electorate.
It burns away the spin and leaves only the ink.
But the politicians weren't the only ones caught in the gravitational pull of these 3.5 million pages.
No, not at all.
The 2026 document release caused an absolute earthquake across international royalty, the tech sector, and the Wall Street elite. Let's look at the royals first. The paper trail surrounding Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, the former Prince Andrew, is just brutal.
The documentary evidence and the unredacted deposition transcripts regarding the former prince were devastating.
We already had the infamous verified photograph of him with his arm around Virginia Giuffre, with Ghislaine Maxwell smiling in the background.
But the 2026 files brought forward the entirely unredacted depositions, including Johannes Joberg's sworn testimony that she was physically groped by Andrew in 2001 while sitting on a couch with a puppet in Epstein's Manhattan townhouse.
And the real-world fallout was immediate and historic. On February 19th, 2026, UK authorities officially arrested him under suspicion of misconduct in public office.
The dominoes actually started falling across the Atlantic. It wasn't just royalty.
Right.
Look at Peter Mandelson, the highly prominent British politician and former cabinet minister. The files released in early 2026 contained hard financial records, wire transfers, showing that Epstein had sent Mandelson money between 2003 and 2004.
Wow.
This wasn't a rumor. It was a verifiable bank transfer sitting on a treasury server. Mandelson was also subsequently arrested in the UK following these financial disclosures.
Let's pivot to the tech and business elite, because this is where a very specific defense gets tested. So many of these billionaires use the excuse that Epstein was merely a philanthropist or a science funder.
Yes, the connector defense.
Right. How do billionaires excuse their proximity to a monster? They claim he was just a connector. Does the forensic paper trail support that defense for anyone? Let's look at Elon Musk.
Musk's name turns up multiple times in the document release. The hard evidence is direct, server-verified email correspondence between Musk and Epstein from 2012 and 2013.
In one specific email from 2012, Musk directly asks Epstein, "What day-night will be the wildest party on your island?"
Asking about a party is not a crime, but when you are emailing a convicted registered sex offender asking about wild parties on his private island, it shatters the public illusion that you only knew the man in passing at sterile charity galas.
Yeah, it shows a level of casual intimacy and social integration that completely undermines the "he was just a science donor" defense.
Absolutely. Then you have Steve Bannon, the prominent political strategist. The files revealed thousands of text messages between Bannon and Epstein, continuing for years after Epstein's 2008 conviction.
Thousands of texts.
The texts discuss international political coalitions, sure, but they also show Epstein providing Bannon with the direct, personal use of his private residences in Paris and Palm Beach.
Again, the geographic logistics map the depth of the relationship.
And we see the immediate, real-time destruction of careers based on these digital records. Look at the mechanics of what happened to Casey Wasserman, the sports marketing mogul who was serving as the chairman of the Los Angeles Organizing Committee for the 2028 Olympics.
The files released a 2003 email exchange between Wasserman and Ghislaine Maxwell. Wasserman writes to Maxwell saying he misses her and explicitly wishes to see her in a tight leather outfit.
And Maxwell replies, offering Wasserman a massage that can drive a man wild.
Within the context of Maxwell's legally established role as a procurer of young women for massages that were actually fronts for sexual abuse, that email is radioactive.
It is not illegal to send a flirtatious email, but the associated damage is catastrophic. The fallout was severe and immediate.
Massive cultural figures, musicians like Chappell Roan and athletes like Abby Wambach, publicly severed ties with Wasserman's agency.
In February 2026, Wasserman was forced to announce he was selling his agency entirely due to past personal mistakes. The paper trail has undeniable corporate consequences.
But to play devil's advocate for a moment, the files do show that Epstein desperately sought to legitimize himself through philanthropy and science, right?
They do, yeah.
There are emails with Bill Gates discussing global health funding. There are records of Epstein donating $400,000 to the Interlochen Center of the Arts. He funded the Harvard program of Martin Nowak. So wasn't some of this just legitimate business?
It's a nuanced defense, but the paper trail eventually crushes it. Yes, the initial connections might have been disguised as legitimate banking or academic funding, but the sheer overwhelming volume of correspondence regarding young women, massages, and off-the-books favors entirely drowns out the legitimate philanthropy.
Jess Staley is the perfect example of this,
Yeah.
the former CEO of Barclays and a top executive at JP Morgan.
The files contain numerous FBI 302 summaries regarding Staley. To understand the gravity of that, a 302 is not a transcript. It is an official, formalized report written by an FBI agent summarizing a witness interview.
Right.
The 302s detail specific allegations that Staley engaged in rough sex with a victim during a massage directed by Epstein.
Staley vehemently denied this, but the financial and logistical records show Epstein kept hundreds of millions with Staley's bank, and Staley personally visited Epstein's private island.
Even when the initial connection was corporate banking, the gravitational pull of the enterprise eventually corrupted the relationship. The paper trail shows that the financial advisor excuse was, in almost every case, a thin veneer over a deeply compromised, illicit social dynamic.
The illusion of a purely professional relationship simply cannot survive the exposure of thousands of emails discussing wild parties and private massages.
It's staggering. We're looking at an archive that brought down international politicians, forced billionaires to resign from their boards, caused Olympic chairmen to sell their life's work, and led to the arrests of British royalty.
All because the Transparency Act finally forced the government to release the hard drives.
Which brings us to the ultimate synthesis of our deep dive. When you step back and look at the fundamental architecture of information in these 3.5 million pages, what is the core lesson?
The lesson is that human memory is incredibly fragile. When memory is weaponized by the ultra-wealthy through strategic amnesia and bottomless legal funds, it causes the standard machinery of justice to fail entirely.
We saw how Ghislaine Maxwell's, I don't recall, defense stalled the civil depositions.
We saw how the local police in Palm Beach were investigating a localized crime, completely blind to the global syndicate operating right in front of them. The standard machinery failed the victims for decades.
But the counterbalance to that failure is the immortality of the paper trail. The flight manifests handwritten by the pilot logging weight and balance. The thousands of emails stored on redundant corporate servers.
The FinCEN alerts.
The DEA memos tracking $1.5 billion in suspicious wire transfers bouncing through Russian correspondent banks. That metadata formed the immutable structural record of the enterprise.
When the 2026 Force document release finally dragged that architecture out of the dark, it provided the definitive clarity needed to shatter the network.
So why does this matter to you, the listener? If you are sitting in traffic right now or prepping for a meeting, why should you care about the granular financial mechanics of a multi-million-page document dump about a dead billionaire?
It matters because it is the ultimate, undeniable proof that in the modern digital and financial age, ultimate secrecy is a myth.
A complete myth.
And no matter how much political influence you wield, no matter how many billions of dollars you deploy to shield a criminal enterprise, the paper trail always survives.
The servers capture the late-night emails. The correspondent banks record the wire transfers. The pilots log the transatlantic flights.
The truth is always there, buried in the data, waiting for someone with the authority and the will to drag it out into the light.
And that reality brings up one vital, lingering question. We have spent an hour dissecting the 3.5 million pages released by the DOJ. We have analyzed the politicians, the Wall Street titans, the flight logs, and the civil depositions. But we must remember the exact scope of the archive we just examined.
Which circles us right back to our opening metaphor, the black hole. We have successfully mapped the accretion disk. We have measured the mass of the panicked emails and the billion-dollar wire transfers.
Right.
But here is one final provocative thought for you to mull over as we end this deep dive. The 3.5 million pages we just spent all this time analyzing, those were only the unclassified domestic files.
Let that sink in.
We know for a fact, based on the unredacted memos, that the DEA Fusion Center was investigating this network from 2010 to 2015 as a transnational organized crime syndicate.
We know they were tracking funds moving through Russian correspondent banks and overseas tax havens.
We know Epstein had documented ties to foreign intelligence operatives and politicians globally. So if 3.5 million pages of unclassified domestic files possess enough kinetic energy to arrest British royalty and bring down Wall Street titans, what is still sitting inside the highly classified international intelligence vaults that we aren't allowed to see?
What does the actual center of the black hole look like?
That is the question that should keep every investigative journalist awake at night.
Absolutely.
Until next time, keep digging.